Thank you, Jennifer, for that kind introduction, and to all of our esteemed staff here, thank you for including me in the ceremony. And to you, the class of 2013, congratulations! It is really my honor to be with you today, especially because I know you guys chose your commencement speaker. So this once-in-a-lifetime moment has arrived. Graduation day is here. And in the words of the one and only Taylor Swift, I think I kind of know what you're thinking. Oh, there you are. We got one or two Taylor Swift fans. Happy, free, confused and lonely, miserable and magical at the same time. Who would have thought Taylor Swift would make it to Harker Commencement, but here it is. Basically, I'm here with some good news and some bad news. I'll give you the good news first. Well, the very first good news is you're one speech away from getting your diplomas. Yeah. Now, you might be surprised to hear this, but you're about to step into a world that's in pretty good shape. Actually, it's in the best shape that it's ever been. The average person has never been fed better than today. Infant mortality has never been lower. On average, we're leading longer, healthier lives. Child labor, illiteracy, unsafe water have ceased to be global norms. Democracy is in. Slavery is disappearing. People don't have to work as hard just to survive. A bicycle in 1895 cost us 260 working hours. Now we've knocked it down to 7.2. So things are progressing. We've moved. We've done good. But you'll have to brace yourself because I got to tell you some bad news too. This week's cover, Time magazine cover, I don't know how many of you guys saw it, labeled your generation, the millennial generation, as the me generation. The week before, New York Times reported that the suicide rate for 35 to 50-year-olds in the last decade alone went up by 30%. And that rate for the boomers went up by 50%. We just learned that the atmospheric carbon levels surpassed 400 parts per million for the first time in human history. Honeybees colonies are collapsing and threatening our food supply. And all of this is just the tip of the iceberg. So we're handing over a world to you that's full of inspiring realities, but also incredibly daunting ones. In other words, miserable and magical isn't just a pop song lyric, it's the paradox you're inheriting from all of us. So what are you going to do with that? I'm going to be honest, I don't know. But what I do know is this, at the core of all of today's most pressing challenges is one fundamental issue. We have become profoundly disconnected. And that sounds ironic given that we live in a Facebook era that has spawned 150 billion connections between us. As we collectively shell out, get this, 2.7 billion likes every single day on people's status updates. Right? Yet, as you might know, the growing body of science is showing us that what we already feel deep in our gut, that we're more isolated than ever before. The average American reports having just one real friend that they can count on. And for the first time in 30 years, mental health disabilities such as ADHD outrank physical ones amongst American children. So somehow we've allowed relationships to gadgets and things overtake our real world ties. We've forgotten to rescue each other. But deep down inside, we still have that capacity. And we know it because we saw it in Sandy Hook, in those teachers that died to save the lives of their children. We saw it in Boston, where you had the runners running past. They finished their marathon and they ran past the end, all the way to the blood bank to donate blood. We saw it this week in Oklahoma, where a fellow who's working at a restaurant says, all my tips I'm going to donate to relief efforts, and it starts a whole tornado of positive activity. So we know we can do this when crisis strikes. We've seen it again and again. But can we do it on run-of-the-mill Monday? That's the question in front of all of you. Will you, the class of 2013, step up to rebuild a culture of trust empathy, and compassion. Our crisis of disconnection needs a renaissance, a real renaissance of authentic friendship. And we need you to upgrade us from the me, me, me culture to we. So reflecting on my own journey, there have been 3 keys that have led me, that have returned me to this place of connection. And I'd like to share those with you today. The first is to give. In the movie Wall Street, you guys probably don't remember that, but there's this character named Gordon Gekko. Michael Douglas plays this role really well, and in this epic speech, he declares 3 words that have been quoted again and again, and they are, greed is good. I'm glad none of you clapped for that. Silicon Valley was where I grew up, and when I was coming out, the dot-com boom was hitting. And it was very easy to believe that greed is good. But something deep down inside told us, no, maybe there's something else. That maybe greed is good, but generosity is better. We tested this hypothesis. When I started Service Space, right after I got out of college, we built websites for nonprofits at no charge. We ended up building and gifting away thousands of these websites. But that really wasn't our main goal. Our main goal was to practice generosity. In the early days, it was funny. The media comes up and says, we're pretty sure you have a hidden agenda. And we looked at them and said, we're just doing this to practice generosity, to give with no strings attached. They didn't believe us. Even amongst those who believed us, they said, well, if you want to do something serious, if you want to sustain yourself, then you can't do this kind of thing. And we said, well, we'll see. The thing is, we did. A decade later, when our work started attracting millions of viewers, entrepreneurs told us that we'd be crazy not to slap on ads or try to monetize our services. The thing is, we didn't. And we probably were a bit crazy. And then we did something where they completely flipped, they were like completely thinking this is impossible. We started a restaurant that some of you might have heard about called Karma Kitchen. Now you walk into Karma Kitchen and it's like any other restaurant, but your check reads 0. It's 0 because someone before you has paid for you and you pay forward for somebody after you. Impossible, they said. The thing is, 25,000 meals later, it's continuing in many cities around the world. People consistently underestimate generosity, but human beings are simply wired to give. At Harvard, a bunch of scientists did this really beautiful experiment. They surprised a couple hundred volunteers, and they said, we're just going to give you some money. You have 2 choices. You can keep it, or you can give it. Only catch is, you can't think about it. You have to do it spontaneously. What would people do? Majority of the people gave the money. They gave it. Greed is a calculated afterthought, they concluded. It is in our natural instinct to give. And in Econ 101, which I'm sure is a prerequisite for all colleges, you will learn that all economics is rooted in this fundamental idea that human beings aim to maximize self-interest. But is that really so? I hope you don't just take that for granted. I hope you challenge it. Consider the likes of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, who have rocked the history of our planet with the exact opposite assumption, with the faith in the goodness and generosity of people. Or consider Ruby Bridges. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was the first African-American girl to go to an all-white school on November 14th, 1960. All the teachers, they told her, we're not going to teach, except for one Mrs. Henry. People would line up to just shout, jeer, and throw things at her. And this is a 6-year-old. Mrs. Henry told her, Ruby, don't pay any attention to them, don't talk to them, come straight to class. And so she would come. Except one day, Miss Henry says, Ruby, I told you not to speak with them. Why were you speaking? She says, no, Mrs. Henry, I wasn't speaking. She says, Ruby, I saw your lips moving. You were talking. She says, oh no, I wasn't talking to them. I was just praying for them. And then she recites the prayer to Mrs. Henry. And I quote, please God, try to forgive these people. Because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. A 6-year-old wishing well for those wishing her harm. How generous is that? And what does it say about the power of the human heart? Our capacity to love is a currency that just never runs out. And may each of you tap into that generous ocean and discover every day what it means to give. Now, the second key after giving is to receive. Right? When we give, we think we're helping other people because those people are kind of broken, they need our help, and we're gifted. But that's true in some cases. But we're also helping ourselves. With any act of unconditional service, no matter how small, our biochemistry actually changes. Our mind quiets down. There is this rise in gratefulness. And this inner transformation fundamentally shifts the direction of our lives. A couple years ago, we had 2 summer interns in service space. They were 14-year-olds, Neil and Dylan. Among the many things they had to do a kindness challenge. So kindness challenge meant that every day you do a kind act. But the only thing is that you have to do a different kind act than the one you did before. Initially, they would plan and scheme and go out and do all these things. And then after a while, their daily life became a canvas for generosity. They were doing some incredible things, doing dishes for mom without her asking, stopping to help a stranger with a flat tire, standing up for a bullied kid. And I remember, I think they went to an arcade one time, and they won a whole bunch of things, and they saw a kid who hadn't won anything. They go and give all their earnings to that kid. Very quickly, kindness wasn't just an activity. It wasn't what they were doing. It was who they were becoming in the process of the doing. And last weekend, just a few days ago, I happened to see Neil after a long time. And every time we meet, he kind of tells me a kindness story. He says, yesterday was senior prom. And he tells me a little bit about it. And he says, what happened is that our dance floor was a little small, and so everyone couldn't get on. And especially those special needs kids on that side. And so I got a bunch of my friends, and I said, you know what? We'll just take the dance floor to them. We'll just go and create a little circle over there. And we did that. And he pauses for a reflective moment, and he looks me in the eye, and he says, everyone had a great time. It felt amazing. But do you think I was being selfish? Wow, what a profound question. What Neil experienced was the fact that when we give, we receive many times over. Dalai Lama once said it on a billboard that was only to be seen in the Silicon Valley. It was taken down in one day, and that read, be selfish, be generous. It is in giving that we're actually receiving. When we think of generosity, we typically think of it as a zero-sum game. If I give you $1, one less dollar for me. The inner world, though, doesn't work like that. In the inner world, the boundaries aren't so easy to decipher. Your state of being inherently affects mine. And this isn't just feel-good talk. This is actual science. Research shows that in close proximity, if we start to connect, our heartbeats start to synchronize. Our heartbeats synchronize without any physical contact. Neuroscience now has this discovery of mirror neurons that shows that we literally do feel others' pain and joy. And the thing with joy is that it's not a zero-sum game. The law of abundance says that if I give you a smile, that's not one less smile for me. The more I smile, the more I do smile. The more I love, the more love I have to give. So when you give externally, you receive internally. And how do the two compare? Back to Neil's question. And that's a question only you can answer. And really, your answer is going to keep changing as your awareness deepens. But this much is clear. If you only focus on the externals, you will live a life in the deadening pursuit of power and products. But if you stay in touch with your inner truth, you will come alive with joy, purpose, and gratitude. You will tap into the law of abundance. May you discover that to be truly selfish, you must be generous. In giving, may you fully experience what it means to receive. And so after give and receive, the last and the third key, which is actually my favorite, is to dance. Our biggest problem with giving and receiving is that we try and keep track of it. And when we do that, we lose the beat. The best dancers are never singularly focused. I'm sure we got some pretty good dancers amongst all of you. The best dancers, you will notice, are never the ones singularly focused on the mechanics of their movements. If they know how to let go and tune into the rhythm and synchronize with their partners. And it's like that with giving too. It's a futile exercise to track who's getting what. We just have to dance. Take one of my friends, for example, a very successful entrepreneur. But along the way, he realized, this famous cliche that it's not, you have to find your gifts. But he realized it's not enough to find your gifts. The gifts are actually meant to be given. So in his daily life, he started doing a bunch of different generosity practices. He did some pretty funky ones. And one of his favorite ones is to go into a restaurant and tell the waiter, go and find a couple that's most madly in love. And tell them someone anonymous has paid for their tab. And restaurants would know him. Sometimes he's a food connoisseur, so he goes to pretty, fancy places, sometimes a couple $100 a person. So one time he goes in, but he's also a big Batman fan, right? So he wants to be anonymous. He wants to be underground. And he doesn't want any. So he tells the waiter, if anyone finds out that I paid, I'm not going to pay for it. So the waiters are always on edge. People kind of know him. And he walks into one of these fancy restaurants one time, and he tells the waiter, their usual drill, right? So the waiter goes out, does it, except that this time the waiter comes back. And he comes back and he says, sir, I know you like to be Batman and you want to be anonymous, but I just went and told that table that someone else had paid for their tab, and the woman just starts crying. I mean, not just crying, like bawling. And it's been 10 minutes and she's still tearing up. So I don't know what to do. I mean, he's probably worried for his job, kindness is supposed to be good, right? I mean, what's going on? 10 minutes later, so he says, maybe you should go out and break your cardinal rule and introduce yourself. So seeing the situation, the guy's like, okay, well, fine, I'll go. He goes up and he says, ma'am, I'm sorry if this has triggered something negative. I was just trying to make your day. And this woman looks him in the eye and says, oh no, you have made our day. You've probably made our life. Because, we work at a small nonprofit that works with developmentally challenged children. We make very little money. And last year we got married and we decided that we were going to save up all through the year so we could celebrate our first year marriage anniversary right here. And to know that we are giving to the world and then the world gives back to us in this magical way just renews our faith in humanity. Thank you so much, she tells him. And this fellow, you can imagine, starts tearing up himself, as does the husband. Now you look at that situation and you say, well, who's doing the giving and who's doing the receiving? And more importantly, though, why does it even matter? Dancing tells us to stop keeping track. Sometimes you're giving and sometimes you're receiving, but it doesn't really matter because the real reward of that give and take isn't the stuff that is exchanged. It's actually what happens in between us. It's our connection. So, my dear friends, there you have it. The bad news is we're in the middle of a crisis of disconnection. And the good news is that each and every one of you has the capacity to repair that web, to give, to receive, and to dance. We need you to do this. I was outside one time, I was in Berkeley, waiting to get into a restaurant, and I see this homeless woman, and I offer her to treat her to a meal. On the way, she says, well, I just want ice cream. I treat her to ice cream. And we have this wonderful connection around generosity. We're talking about giving. And I pay for her ice cream, and at the end, she looks at me and she says, I'd like to give you something. Can I treat you to something? This woman had nothing. She opens up. She probably wasn't even thinking rationally. She puts her hand in her wallet, takes out a nickel. That's all she had. I didn't even know how to respond. And I say, well, this cashier has been real kind. Maybe we can just pay it forward. Remember what we were talking about? Just pay it forward and drop it in his tip jar. She looks at me with a big smile, says, good idea, let's do that. This woman who has nothing feels like giving her nickel. It's incredible. We all have this capacity to give. And as Martin Luther King says, he said it best when he said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. He didn't say you have to be smart to serve. He didn't say you have to be rich to serve. He didn't say you have to be famous to serve. No, he said everyone can be great because everyone can serve. You don't even need to have your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't need to know the second law of thermodynamics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. Harker, class of 2013, may you all find greatness in service to life. May you all give, receive, and never, ever stop dancing. Thank you.